Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines this hour. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel deeply regrets the tragic mishap after a strike on Nasser Hospital in Gaza killed 20 people, including 5 journalists. Netanyahu insists Israel values the work of the media and medical staff. UK Foreign Minister David Lammy said he was horrified. Germany called the attack shocking, and France's Emmanuel Macron declared it intolerable, urging Israel to respect international law. Turkish President Erdogan also slammed Prime Minister Netanyahu's government, accusing it of relentlessly destroying everything that belongs to humanity. In the United States, President Donald Trump hosted South Korean President Lee Jae-myung hours after a Truth Social post warning of a purge or resolution in Seoul. Lee diffused the tension with flattery, even joking about a Trump Tower in North Korea. But the meeting produced few breakthroughs on trade or defense. President Donald Trump told reporters he hopes to meet North Korean leader Kim Jong-un this year as he hosted South Korean leader President Lee Jae-myung for the first time in the White House. Trump said he remains open to further trade talks with Seoul while renewing criticisms of America's ally. Meanwhile, Pyongyang says ongoing joint US-South Korean show Washington's aim to occupy the peninsula, warning such exercises target countries across the region. A top general told the state media that if drills continue, Seoul and Washington will face an unpleasant situation and pay a dear price. Australia has ordered Iran's ambassador to leave within 7 days, accusing Tehran of carrying out 2 anti-Semitic arson attacks in Sydney and Melbourne, its first diplomatic expulsion since World War II. Canberra says Jewish schools, synagogues and vehicles have faced a wave of vandalism and arson since the Israel war began. Donald Trump has announced the immediate removal of Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook, accusing her of making false statements on mortgage agreements. The sacking marks the first time a president has ousted an FED board member in the bank's 111-year history, as Trump escalates pressure on the central bank over interest rates. Australian police confirm an active incident is underway at a property in Porakuna, which is about 300 kilometres northeast of Melbourne. Australian media says 2 officers have been killed and another has been injured in the incident. We start in West Asia this hour, where the world is responding to yesterday's strike at Nasser Hospital in the Gaza Strip, in which 5 journalists from various news outlets and organizations were killed. We have some statements now coming from world leaders. Germany has said it was shocked by the Israeli airstrikes on the hospital in Gaza that killed 20 people, including journalists and rescue workers, and called for an investigation. The German Foreign Ministry urged Israel to allow media access and protect journalists operating in the Strip. US President Donald Trump expressed displeasure while emphasizing the need to end the conflict. Trump also commented on the hostage situation, suggesting some remaining hostages may no longer be alive. Here is what he said.
I'm happy about it. I don't want to see it. At the same time, we have to end that whole nightmare. I'm the one that got the hostages out. I got them out.
British Foreign Secretary David Lammy also responded and said he was horrified by the strikes and called for an immediate ceasefire, stressing the protection of civilians, healthcare workers and journalists. Turkish President Erdogan has also condemned Israel for, quote, villainous attacks, blaming the Netanyahu government for continuing strikes that destroy humanity's basic values. Let's listen in to his direct statements.
İsrail'in bugün Gazze'deki Nasser Hastanesi'ne düzenlediği vahşi saldırıda 5'i gazeteci, en az 20 Filistinli şehit oldu. Gözü dönmüş Netanyahu hükümeti insanlık adına ne varsa yok etmek için cani saldırılarına aralıksız devam ediyor.
Now to Paris, French President Emmanuel Macron called the attacks intolerable, noting the deaths of at least 20 people, including journalists, and stressing that the need to safeguard civilians in Gaza. The Israeli military confirmed the strikes and said that an inquiry has been ordered. The IDF stressed it does not target journalists intentionally and regrets harm to civilians. We are now joined by Elon Pinkas. He is a former Israeli ambassador and he joins us live from Tel Aviv. Elon, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. Pleasure to have your insight on this. The world is obviously reacting in shock to this attack. 5 journalists killed just a week after 6 the previous week. However, the reaction from Israel has been different. Last week, when prominent Al Jazeera journalists were killed, there were claims from the Israeli government that straight away that they were Hamas operatives working for Hamas. However, this response has been different. Israel actually has expressed regret in the deaths of these individuals. Is there a difference here? Why has this approach been taken? And what does this say and signify?
Well, to begin with, Thomas, very few in the world believed Israel last time when it came up with explanations and justifications. So the learning curve was put into use. And now, and in between the 2 incidents, you had world outrage and condemnations. And so the prime minister thought that if he just, apologizes and says it's an unfortunate mishap and that it was not intentional, et cetera, the criticism, the condemnations will go away. I doubt they will go away because if Israel is indeed planning a larger scale operation in Gaza, this is going to happen again. In fact, it's been happening for the last 22, almost 23 months. So the difference between the reactions is only due to world condemnation and outrage. But I don't think it signals any change of policy.
I mean, some damning footage coming out. We're not allowed to run it here, however. There is a shot of a double tap that shows individuals helping the sign of the previous strike, and then once again a strike hitting those individuals that are at the site. What does this say about Israel's military tactics, especially now the entire world has seen this footage?
And imagine what could have happened had Gaza been open to world media. Here's my point, Thomas, and here's the novel idea. Do not shoot at hospitals, okay? There's nothing in that hospital that equals or justifies the so-called collateral damage or the deaths of non-combatants and innocents. Medical crews, media crews, whatever. Just do not shoot at hospitals. Even if you have solid intelligence information that there are 10 or 20 Hamas terrorists in that hospital, leave it be. Do not shoot at hospitals. But Israel keeps on doing this again and again. Now, in this particular incident, look, I'm not versed on the exact details and operational considerations at that moment. It seems like someone was trigger happy. It seems that someone misidentified and fired at the wrong place at the wrong time. But again, that's an excuse. That's not a justification. Just do not shoot at hospitals. Even if this was a mishap, it's not justified.
Elon, do stay with us as we have some further updates from the crisis. We move over to Israel next, where protesters in the Yakum region burned tires and blocked traffic today, demanding the return of hostages held in Gaza. Thick black smoke rose from the road as demonstrators waved Israeli flags and yellow banners, symbolizing solidarity with the captives. Chants and drum beats echoed through the area while protesters held images of those still in captivity. The road and nearby footbridge were occupied, causing traffic to come to a standstill. This is a protest, part of a nationwide day of disruption, urging Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to negotiate with Hamas for the release of hostages and an end to the ongoing conflict. Eilon Pinkas joins us once again. Eilon, very grateful to have you with us to discuss this. Can I get a quick snapshot of the feeling inside Israel? Of course, it's very easy to listen to Benjamin Netanyahu's public statements and hear the rising situation on the battlefield about this ongoing offensive. However, the feeling in Israel of the public, they want an end to this war. Could you tell us a bit about how the Israeli people feel about the way that this war is going, and also about the Benjamin Netanyahu's government and their actions in this conflict now?
Well, you see, Thomas, in consistent polls, you see a clear trend. About 70%, 70% want the war to end and a hostage deal reached, whether it's partial or comprehensive. 70% want this to end. Number one. Number two, almost 70%, 67 or 68 in two polls that I recently saw in the last week, do not trust Netanyahu's motivations and do not trust Netanyahu's motives and motivation when it comes to the prosecution of the war. They think he's doing it for political reasons. They think he's doing it for sheer political expediency, for political survival, and so on. So they don't trust and they don't understand what he's trying to do in Gaza. But forget the Israeli public for a moment. They're angry, they're dejected, they're outraged because they think he's sacrificing the hostages. Look at what the military is saying. The chief of staff of the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, has in the last 2 or 3 weeks more than once expressed, whether in his own voice or through media mediators, a very senior source in the IDF, which is usually him, his reservations about a large-scale operation in Gaza, not just because of the casualties, not just because of the hostages that are being sacrificed. That's obviously the most critical issue, but because he says it will achieve nothing. Just yesterday, there was a statement made, again, anonymous, but I think we could safely assume we can attribute it to him, to the Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir, in which he says the conditions for a deal exist. The government needs to make a decision. This is what the public is protesting about. I saw the protest. I'm talking to you from my apartment, which is 100 meters away, Thomas, from the so-called hostage square. So I saw the gathering. I saw a 1 or 2 road blocking. It's all over the country.
Wow.
But in terms of how I'll want one more sentence with your permission. In terms of public sentiment, this is all good, but if it's not sustainable, if it's not going to continue, then the impact would be negligible.
Eilon, thank you very much for that insight. You are staying with us to discuss further updates from the region. In recent developments, Hezbollah's chief doubled down on his group's refusal to give up its weapons ahead of talks between Lebanese officials and visiting US envoys after the government's decision to disarm the group. Under heavy US pressure and fears of Israel expanding its military action, Lebanon's government this month tasked the army with drawing up a plan to disarm the Iran-backed Hezbollah by this year's end. Let's listen in to what Hezbollah leader Naim Qassem had to say.
السلاح الذي أعزنا لن نتخلى عنه والسلاح الذي يحمينا من عدونا لن نتخلى عنه لن نترك إسرائيل تسرح وتمرح في بلدنا وتقتل المقاومين وتصادر الجنوب. هذا السلاح روحنا وشرفنا وأرضنا وكرامتنا ومستقبل أطفالنا.
In another development, spokesman for the Houthi-run health ministry stated that the death toll from Israel's latest airstrikes on Yemen's capital has risen to 10, while more than 100 were wounded. Israeli forces struck Yemen's capital, Sana'a, days after the Houthis fired a missile towards Israel. In response to that, Israel targeted the oil facility and the power plant in the capital of Sana'a. We are once again joined by Eilon Pinkas to discuss this further. Elon, of course, the Houthis and Hezbollah, both Iran-backed proxies, much like Hamas in the Gaza Strip. These are obviously groups that show severe hostility towards the Israeli state. Can I get your insight into how Israel and yourself feel about the current capabilities of them, the current negotiations in the disarmament of Hezbollah and the current military actions of the Houthis?
Yeah, sure, Thomas. The capabilities have been significantly degraded militarily, technologically, in terms of infrastructure and bases. Both Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and obviously Hamas in Gaza. But you have to look at the broader picture, the broader geopolitical picture. Iran set up and Iran constructed very carefully and very meticulously a network of proxy organizations. If you will, it's like franchises, like McDonald's or, any kind of a chain restaurant. There's a revolutionary regime in Iran, and it has franchisees in Lebanon, Hezbollah, Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in southwest Yemen. Now, Hezbollah for many years presented the most challenging because it was the best armed and, in fact, best funded and best armed of all these proxy organizations. But the most important thing about Hezbollah, which is how you began your report on this, Thomas, is that they basically established a state within a state in Lebanon. The Houthis took over parts of Yemen. Hamas took over Gaza, but the West Bank is still under the Palestinian Authority's control. But in Lebanon, not only did Hezbollah grow militarily and become a major political factor, they essentially challenged the Lebanese government. In between, geographically and politically, there was Syria. Syria under the regime of Bashar Assad, who was a conduit for the Iranians to funnel funds and particularly arms. Ever since the war in Gaza began in October 2023, Israel essentially waged a war against all three proxies, Hamas, Houthis, and Hezbollah, but also against Iran. Obviously, you recall the 12-day war in June, just 2.5 months ago. So geopolitically, that network, that web of proxies has been weakened. But Hezbollah still refuses to disarm, which is why we're talking about these negotiations.
Elon Pinkas, thank you very much. Pleasure to get that analysis from you, and thank you very much for taking the time in joining us. For our next story, we move over to Europe, where in developments from the Russia-Ukraine war, both sides have claimed strikes. Russia claimed strikes on Ukrainian drone bases, and Ukraine reported that it destroyed Russian equipment. This came at a time when Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky met with US Special Envoy for Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, in the capital of Kyiv. President Zelensky later tweeted that they discussed to compel Russia to engage in real negotiations to end the war. Zelensky also stated that military cooperation is important for both Ukraine and the United States. He highlighted two strong opportunities. First, an agreement on arms procurement, and second, an agreement on drones that could significantly strengthen Ukrainians' arsenal. President Zelensky also talked about Russia's concessions during peace negotiations. Let's take a listen in to his statement.
Що стосується поступок Росії, мені про це невідомо. Я не вважаю ті речі, які звучали з російської сторони, що вони готові не захоплювати далі Україну, є поступки.
We're now joined by Paul Gorchunov. He's a financial analyst and he joins us live from Moscow. Thank you very much, Paul, for joining us here on the program. Can I get your insight on the current stage of the war? Of course, we've seen diplomatic heat within the past couple of weeks with that huge meeting in Alaska and that huge meeting in Washington, both sides of the same coin. However, the battlefield does not slow down. What do these competing claims of strikes by Russia and Ukraine. Tell us about the current intensity on the front lines of the battlefield and in the air.
Well, one thing, as you mentioned, I'm a financial analyst, not a military one, but it's always reflected in the economics. There really hasn't been any visible cranking up of activity except from the side of Ukraine, coinciding with meetings with people like Kellogg or Trump or Mertz and so on. It's sort of like, we're still here. The die is cast. I really don't see any way that Ukraine can win this militarily. And there's a lot of disinformation and misinformation going about. Lately, there was the complaint that Russia dropped 3 missiles on an American-owned coffee machine factory. Well, that was true. Coffee machines that were not reported about was that those coffee machines burned for 32 hours with a lot of secondary explosions, and no matter how many fire brigades were there, they couldn't calm it down until a day and a half later. So I wouldn't want those coffee machines in my kitchen, I'll tell you that. So what can you say?
Paul, another thing that was obviously floated by Donald Trump was the proposition of fresh sanctions on Moscow if negotiations didn't move forward. There's once again that threat lingers over Vladimir Putin if a bilateral meeting does not happen between Zelensky and Putin. Can I just ask you how the Russian economy is feasing, how the Russian stock market is feasing as well with the constant influx of Trump claims of sanctions, of action, etc., etc.?
Well, you know, the story of the boy crying wolf, it really has very little effect right now. In terms of pressuring Vladimir Putin or anyone in the government of Russia, sanctions are ineffective. Much like in India, with Modi now having to look at a further 25%, making 50% tariffs on Indian goods. If he stands strong, America can't do much. India is part of a much broader market now that it is with the BRICS and the global South. It's a transitional period that takes guts, and Modi has guts, much like Putin does. They'll stay the course.
Yes, do stay with us, Paul, as we have further updates. But next we move over to South Asia, where India is bracing for a major blow to its exports as the US prepares to impose a 50% tariff on Indian origin goods effective from tomorrow. This comes after a Homeland Security notice confirmed a 25% tariff hike in retaliation for India's increased oil purchases from Russia. The tariffs, among the highest ever imposed by Washington, are set to take effect at 12:01 a.m. tomorrow EDT. Meanwhile, the United States has issued a draft notice to implement an additional 25% tariff on Indian imports to America. We are now joined once again by Paul Gorchanov. He joins us live from Moscow once again. Paul, how severe will the impact of these 50% tariffs be on Indian exporters across key sectors here?
Well, it'll be severe. It'll certainly be felt, but it takes a little bit of getting used to. That I can tell you, having lived here in Moscow for the past few years. But I believe that alternatives are already out there. India is not entirely dependent on America buying them out of a situation. There are huge markets elsewhere, and that are much closer to the interests of India, financially using the rupee, and it's a slow departure from the U.S. dollar, and that's continuing and getting more intense.
Paul,
what more can you say?
Yes, Paul Gorchanov, thank you very much for your insight, and thank you very much for taking the time and giving us so much valuable information on those topics. We now move over to the United States for our next story, where President Donald Trump has ordered to remove Federal Reserve Board member Lisa Cook from her position. In a letter posted on Truth Social, Trump cited sufficient reason linked to alleged false statements on mortgage agreements. Cook, who is the first African-American woman on the board, has denied the allegations, saying they stem from a loan application she made years ago. The move escalates Trump's feud with the Federal Reserve, particularly Chairman Jerome Powell, over interest rates. Legal experts suggest the White House may need to prove its case in court. This decision could set a historic precedent. We are now joined by Dr. Satoru Nagao. He is a fellow at the Hudson Institute, and he joins us live from Tokyo. Dr. Nagao, as always, pleasure to talk to you. How unprecedented is this move? This has never happened in the Federal Board's 111-year history. What is the importance of this?
This is important because President Trump wants to integrate economic policy and financial policy under the one chain of command under him. So this is the first time, and this is, of course, if the Trump administration succeeds to this move, they will dominate, control all of the policy related to economy. Of course, there is a possibility it will be effective, but at the same time, why originally the system divided two policies? Because the divide is more effective, they believe. So that's why, of course, the result will decide which one is right. But at the same time, there are many lessons. Separated power is also effective way. So it relies on what will happen later.
Yes, Dr. Nagao, thank you very much for joining us here on the program. Pleasure to talk to you. We now move over to Southeast Asia, where at least 3 people have died and 10 were injured as Typhoon Kajik hit northern and central Vietnam, causing floods, collapsed homes, and felled trees in Hanoi. The storm, now weakened into a tropical depression, damaged nearly 7,000 homes, submerged 28,800 hectares of rice fields, and downed 331 electricity poles across several provinces. Floodwaters in Hanoi reached 1 meter in places, stalling vehicles and disrupting traffic. Authorities had evacuated 44,000 people and called back fishing boats before the landfall. The military has deployed over 346,000 personnel and 8,200 vehicles to support relief and remain on alert for flash floods and landslides. Listen in to what a resident said.
Cái cơn bão hôm qua là cơn bão rất khủng khiếp và nó phá hoại đi nhiều tài sản của nhân dân. Thì cơn bão hôm qua là cơn bão lớn nhất mà từ trước đến giờ tôi gặp. Nói chung là nó rất lớn. Lần đầu tiên được trông thấy và tôi rất sợ hãi trước khi cơn bão tới.
Well, that is all that we have time for, but we will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world. Thank you.